everyone and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to be talking about how to deal with burnout as a PhD student. In case you are new here, my name is Ciara. I'm a third year, soon to be final year PhD student based in Dublin, Ireland. I also run a business which is a speech and drama school, and I have this brand which is all about sharing productivity advice as a PhD student. So naturally I have experienced burnout a fair share of times now, I must say. I even had a bit of burnout this week, so perfect time to be making this video. If the audio is off in this video, I'm really sorry. I cannot find my microphone. I'm just hoping the built-in microphone on this camera does me a solid today. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about in this video is based on the book Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. I don't know if that's how you pronounce the names, but I really hope that it is. And I listened to it on Audible, so if you're interested in checking it out, with an Audible free trial, you'll get a free audiobook, so you can basically listen to this book for free, so I'll have that linked down below for you. So firstly, what is burnout? So burnout is feeling overwhelmed with all of the things that you need to do, but at the same time you're feeling like you're not doing enough. Usually it's also accompanied with a lot of fatigue, so exhaustion, maybe an illness, feelings of a lack of motivation, a lack of desire to do your work, and a lot of these really difficult feelings that can make work very uncomfortable. Typically it's characterized by three things. So the first is depersonalization, so feeling a lack of a personal connection to your work, for example. A decreasing sense of accomplishment, so the more work you're doing, the less and less you're feeling like you're getting some sense of accomplishment. And then also emotional exhaustion, so just completely feeling emotionally wiped out, emotionally fatigued. The way that burnout affects us will be very individual depending on the person, and typically we'll have each of those three things, but we might experience them in different sort of volumes. And there is some literature to show that the way that men and women experience burnout can be quite different. So typically more men will feel the sense of depersonalization, whereas more women will feel the sense of emotional exhaustion. Burnout is often talked about with regards to work, but it equally is going to be affecting, things related to family life, relationship commitments, vocational work, basically anything where there are demands placed on you and ongoing unreachable expectations, and where there's a personal investment involved, where you need to care for people, invest your time. To me, it's kind of a crazy thing to say out loud that we're feeling overwhelmed by the sheer volume of things we need to do and still feeling like we're not doing enough. So you might be wondering, how is that possible? And one sort of reason that happens is something called human giver syndrome, which is talked a lot about in a book called Down Girl by Kate Mann, which is The Logic of Misogyny. And essentially it's the idea that there are human givers and human takers, and human givers are people who feel obliged, feel like they owe themselves, whether that's their time, their attention, their bodies, to the human takers essentially. And we feel that we need to give up these in service of the other people. And these other people are then able to be highly accomplished individuals because they're sort of benefiting from the sacrifice of other people. And generally this is something that affects women more because of deeply ingrained societal and historical forces that are raising women up to be the givers essentially, and will often be taking more of a caregiving role in a lot of responsibilities, whether that's a mother, carer, nurse, teacher. A lot of the time these caregiving responsibilities are largely placed on women. It's not to say that it doesn't affect people who aren't women. The authors stress that this isn't a true representation of what women have to offer in society, but rather it's down to what the current beliefs are, and we need to challenge those and change our beliefs if we want to overcome this. So it's important that not allowing people to punish us when we're doing things for ourselves, but also not punishing other people who aren't fitting into society's expectations. So for example, if we see someone who is putting themselves and their needs ahead of sacrificing their well-being for other people, maybe not saying that they're selfish or lazy, but saying that they're taking care of themselves and that is what they need to do. So that's my little rant about that over. And just a last point as well is that burnout can look very similar to other things, and it's important to speak to a doctor. I'm not a doctor. It can look similar to things like depression or anxiety, but a lot of the time the distinguishing factor is that while with depression or anxiety, sometimes it could be difficult to do the bare necessities of getting out of bed and doing what you need to do in daily life. With burnout, you're typically able to get to work and get there, but you just get this big sense of overwhelm when it comes to doing the work. And yeah, they are definitely closely related though, and I always think it's good to speak to a professional about these things. So what's the science behind why we burn out? Burnout is what happens when we have unresolved stress in our body. And that comes down to two things really. The first is where that stress is coming from, but then it's also what we do with that stress. And if we think back to the early days of people and how our sort of evolution has developed to handle stress, typically stress happens when we're met with some sort of perceived threat in the environment. So that could be something like a lion chasing us. We have our response to threat in our bodies, which is fight, flight, or freeze, and our whole body will be focused on whatever that action is. Our body will decide what is best, so what it thinks will be the best way to preserve us, whether that is fighting, in which case our blood might rush to our hands and we're ready to take a punch at someone, or it could be fleeing, which will be when all of our energy sort of rushes to our legs and helps us to get away, or it could be freezing. So sometimes the best course of action is to play dead essentially and wait for the perceived threat to be finished before we can then leave. And there will be lots of hormones like cortisol and adrenaline that rush through our body, and in order to help us take whatever action that our body decides is correct. And all of our other systems like our digestion, our reproduction, our immune system basically shut down temporarily in response to this stressed state. If you've ever experienced adrenaline, like what it actually feels like, I had to get a local anesthetic recently for a procedure that I had, and it was absolutely horrible what happened. Like your whole body starts to shake as it kind of pumps through you. So when all of this is going through our body, when we run from a lion, essentially it takes up all of this adrenaline, all of these hormones. When we get to safety, when our brain perceives the threat as over, it sends a signal, we've used up all of this stress, and it all sort of leaves our body. And you might be thinking, okay, that's great, good history, science lesson, whatever, but I'm doing a PhD, there's no lion chasing me. Nowadays, those aren't the typical stresses we have. Obviously, we can be in dangerous situations like that where we do have these sort of physical responses to stress, but nowadays a lot of our stress is internalized. It happens for a number of reasons, largely when we are set impossible expectations, whether that's by ourselves or by other people. The stress happens when we're unable to meet these impossible expectations. And because that stress is internalized, we don't get this same physical release that ends the stress cycle, because the way we deal with the stress isn't to, for example, punch someone in the face when they've frustrated us or annoyed us. It is to maybe go and talk to their manager or ignore them. And so we don't get that physical release of the stress, even though that's what our body is sort of craving. So when we don't do that, all of the stress hormones go unresolved in our body. And a lot of the time this can mean that our systems that have been put on hold, like digestion, reproduction, and immune systems, don't know that everything is okay and that they can go back to normal. So when you have burnout, you'll see people getting a cold or a flu. You'll see people maybe having some sort of digestive issue, like you could have stomach problems when you're feeling stressed, or even people losing their period temporarily in response to this unresolved stress. And not only is this stress internalized and being taken with us, it's also often something that we deal with chronically. So it's not like it's a one and done, okay, this stressful situation happened once and I can move on. It's something that happens potentially every single day. So how do we deal with stressors and stress? As I said, becoming overwhelmed by stress is two parts. So first is dealing with the stressors, which is what caused the stress, and the other thing is dealing with the stress itself. So if someone is harassing you in the street, for example, you could deal with that stressor by just ignoring them and, not giving them the satisfaction of thinking that they angered or scared you, but that anger or fear will still be staying in your body. And one of the reasons burnout happens is because people are avoiding turning inwards and allowing those difficult and painful feelings we have to be felt. We might feel embarrassed in a situation like that for feeling afraid when somebody in the street has harassed you, because maybe logically the likelihood of something dangerous happening was low, potentially. Sometimes it's not, but sometimes it is. You feel embarrassed that you felt fear, and so you'll try and push that down or diminish it or say that you're stupid for feeling that way. We might feel embarrassed and really don't allow ourselves to feel the feeling. One of the really good metaphors I think that the book uses around feelings and stress is that feelings or stress is a tunnel, and you have to go through the darkness to get to the light at the end. People have a lot of fear of their feelings. They don't allow themselves to feel their feelings, and they're afraid that if they do, they'll get stuck in that feeling. But by not going through it, your body will get stuck in that feeling anyways, because all of those responses are still happening. It's just that you're not getting the release at the end of having moved through that feeling. This is something I'm still working on with a counsellor, because I don't always allow myself to have these feelings. I feel guilty or embarrassed for having certain types of feelings that I perceive as bad or negative, and I just try and ignore them. What I'm trying to do more now is look at them with compassion and kindness and curiosity and understanding, which is really, really hard, but I've been a lot less stressed since I've begun this journey, or at least I hold on to stress for a lot less time, because this week when I was on the verge of burnout, I could feel myself becoming pretty fatigued and tired, demotivated, and after my counselling session I got to the bottom of some challenging feelings that I just wasn't facing. Now I feel a lot better. So feeling our feelings. It sounds very sort of cheesy, but it's really important. When you're sad, having a good cry can be a great way of overcoming that feeling, rather than just trying to be happy about something or look on the bright side. Sometimes you need to go through that full experience of that feeling to move through it. When it comes to stress, the physical response that we need is some sort of action. Even when we're freezing, there is an action that follows, and that's what gets rid of the stress from our body. So using our body, doing something is what we need, rather than what we often tend to do in these stressed, which is just sort of ruminate, and you try and distract yourself, but not in a way that is a sort of a physical use of your body. So the number one way that we can do that is exercise. I know we're probably sick of hearing that exercise is good for us, but it's really good for us. It is the number one way to use up your energy that you have from hormones of stress. Some sort of cardio or doing a little dance, shaking out all of your muscles, tensing all of your muscles, using your body in that physical way will allow all of that stress to move through you. I try and move several times a day because I'm dealing with a lot of chronic stress, and I try and do that morning, midday, evening, and it really helps. It helps a lot. Other things that can really help are affection. So there's been studies to show that a 6-second kiss or a 20-second hug, or even just spending some time with a pet, can be great ways of doing that. Deep breathing, laughing, doing some sort of creative expression, so artwork, writing, whatever that might be, doesn't matter whether you're good or bad at it, but doing something like that can be a really good way. And then having some sort of positive social interaction, so even just general chit chat. And then lastly, a good night's sleep can be really transformative, and just rest in general is really important, because first of all, when we sleep, we reap all of the benefits of what we did that day. So whether that's spending time on a mental challenge, doing physical things, overnight is when we actually get the benefits of what we've done. And having proper sleep and time off from our work, our brains tend to be more active at that time than they do when we're actually working on something. And it's a really important way to ensure that we actually have proper creative breakthroughs that we need for our research. So if there's two things that could be paramount, it would be exercise and proper night's sleep, and then also like affection as well, I think. Oftentimes, as I said, we're dealing with stress every day. So it's important to try and plan ways to overcome that stress every day. So I try and especially schedule movement every day. I walk a lot, I try and go to the gym a few times a week, I do yoga, and this helps me release a lot of the stress that I would be having, because with everything that I do have a lot of chronic stress. So there's ways to plan around it to avoid burnout by incorporating these things and ensuring that we are having these things out of our body regularly. Okay, so dealing with stressors. So some of these stressors will be impossible to overcome, and some of these will be possible to overcome. So we sort of know how to get rid of the stress out of our bodies now, but we also want to try and reduce as much of the stressors as possible, because this will just overall reduce our likelihood of becoming burnt out. The number one way that we can do that is managing expectations. In many situations, including when we're doing a PhD, we're dealing with a lot of people's expectations, our own, our supervisors, our families, our peers, and when it comes to our own expectations, often we are wanting ourselves to be this incredible researcher who's able to do everything, and we often diminish the work that we have set out for ourselves. If we're telling ourselves things aren't that difficult, when we then face a struggle, it can be really hard to deal with because we weren't expecting it. It's important to be honest and realistic with ourselves and other people about the challenges that we're going to be facing, and then it's not going to be as big a surprise when something we're facing is challenging. Expectations determine frustrations, so if we can manage our expectations, we can manage our frustrations. When it comes to other people's expectations, then a lot of the time we are trying to meet unattainable ideals that other people set for us, and that is going to make us burnt out. This is definitely a big one for me because I am constantly feeling that people in my PhD expect me to be fully dedicated, and people in the business expect me to be fully dedicated, and people on this channel would expect me to be dedicated, and I can't possibly meet all of those expectations. But especially because a lot of the time people don't actually have these expectations, and I'm making assumptions about other people and not giving them a voice in the discourse. But even if they do have those expectations, I can't meet them anyways. So although it's very difficult, the number one thing I can do is try and care less about what other people are expecting. Another key point is to learn from our mistakes. When we make a mistake and do something that has led to us experiencing a big negative emotion or a lot of stress, it's very easy to just try and move past it or pretend it didn't happen and avoid taking responsibility, just trying to push all of that stress away. Of course, we can complete the stress cycle, but if we don't really acknowledge the mistake and try and learn from it, we're opening ourselves up to just experiencing that stress again and again. So it's important to really ask ourselves, how can we avoid this situation in the future, and make a plan for how we can overcome this and avoid this same stress pattern. Sometimes it's unavoidable, and that's okay, but a lot of the time it is avoidable. So for example, last year, my first year running the business in person after the pandemic, there was a number of times where I had a huge amount of stress because we were getting things together in the last minute because we had never done it before, we didn't know how long things would take. Whereas this year I've learned a lot from that, and I have been doing things a little bit faster or a little bit more in advance and trying to get ahead so that I don't have as much stress. And I can tell you this year I've had a lot less stress. And I try constantly with the business to figure out what's not working, so what's causing me unnecessary stress or frustration, and how can we overcome that, rather than just constantly being stressed and frustrated by various things in the business. Throughout all of this, it's really important that we are being kind to ourselves and not beating ourselves up for mistakes or for not meeting our own expectations or other people's expectations, because that just will create more stress for ourselves. So self-compassion is a huge important point here. It is easier said than done, and it will take a lot of time before you can really be that kind person that you need. A big point in this book is that wellness is not self-care, and being independent is not something we should strive for necessarily, because when we are feeling stressed, I think a lot of people can relate to this, it's really hard to take care of ourselves on top of everything else that we're trying to do, and a lot of the time we will just let our self-care go. So it's easy to say take care of yourselves and relax, but it's not that realistic. Yes, we can plan in time for exercise and proper rest, but it's important that we also have a really strong network of people around us who care about us and will tell us we need to take a break. Basically, the key to all of this is taking care of each other, but not in the one-sided human giver kind of way, but that everyone is doing their part to look after each other. That can be a difficult thing to get started with if it's something that you don't do with the people in your life. Usually it is closer than you think. You can start this with the people in your family that you don't usually talk to about these things, or people, co-workers, whatever that might be, to look out for each other. And it'll take some time, but it is worth doing. Lastly, I just wanted to talk about persistence. I wasn't sure where exactly to fit this into the video, so here it is now. But I think a big point for avoiding the sort of feelings of disconnection when it comes to burnout is just building up your persistence and resilience through meaning. So having a deep connection to what your meaning is with regards to your work, with regards to your PhD, is going to help to keep you going and is going to help you avoid burnout. So having a sense of why you're doing what you're doing, what you want to achieve in the long term, having a sense of what your goals are, and making an action plan to work on shorter term goals is all really important for staying connected to what you're doing, which is one of the 3 things that we often experience with burnout. I talked a lot about this already on this channel, so I'm not going to go into detail on that, but I just wanted to keep that in as a point. That is it for this video. If you got to this point in the video, maybe think about subscribing. It would really mean a lot to me. While you're down there, maybe give this video a thumbs up, share some of your experiences of burnout in the comments, because I do think this community is a great way of stopping us all from feeling so alone in our PhD journeys. Thank you all for watching. Thanks to my wonderful members as always, and I will see you all in the next video.